But let's start at Old Trafford. Now, let's try to just sum up where we are.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole bunch of boring procedural steps that they have to go through before things become official. So all we know that's kind of 100% official is Richard Arnold is stepping down as
Finally.
chief executive.
That's right.
We also know that Jim Ratcliffe has an agreement in principle to pay 1.25 billion, something like that, to take over 25% of the club.
Yeah.
That's what we know kind of for certain. There's suggestions there might be an announcement that the deal has gone through next week. Certainly viewed from the outside, based on what we've been told as well, Richard Arnold would not be stepping down if
Makes sense.
Jim Ratcliffe were not taking a big chunk of the club. We also think, or at least I think you agree, Jules, that Jim Ratcliffe isn't going to go at his age and spend 1.25 billion just to say, hey, Glazers, here, go, run with it. You guys make all the decisions at the club. So I think clearly he has worked in that he is going to have some significant amount of say in naming the new chief executive who's going to replace Richard Arnold, presumably the new head of recruitment, if we think there will be one. Well, Paul Mitchell's been mentioned. We'll get to that. And maybe even, I would suspect, some sort of escalator where over time he can buy out shares in the other Glazer siblings, maybe even the Glazers themselves, and take total control of the club. This is what we think is possible.
Total control, maybe, although at his age, as you said, he's over 70 now. He might not have the time, the energy, I don't know. Certainly has the money, but maybe not the rest. But he will be hands-on, that's for sure. We know that's what we're being briefed. Everybody's being briefed the same anyway. Hands-on also to refurbish the stadium, or certainly to put money in towards refurbishment of the stadium, of Carrington training grounds, of all of that. So that's why I see it as this should be very good news for all Manchester United fans. It should be an exciting time, not just because you finally get rid of the Ed Woodward and his twin Richard Arnold partnership to run this club on a daily basis. And I'm not saying that whoever comes next is going to do a better job, but I just hope that they do, and it would be hard not to. And then also because sporting-wise, this is in a way a new dawn in the sense, certainly, of finally you would expect a structure in place that is actually like all the other top clubs in Europe.
And I think you hit the nail on the head. And to me, when I look back over the last 10 years of underachievement, right, after Sir Alex left, there's one common thread, which to me is the fact that this club did not have a director of football until very recently, until John Murtagh was appointed. And even once he was appointed, this is a club whose recruitment has always been manager-driven. Manager wants him, whether it's Van Gaal or whether it's Mourinho or whether it's Solskjaer or whether it's Davy Moyes. Rangnick didn't really get what he wanted, but whatever. It's always been manager-led. And I'm sorry, there is a reason why I think in every organized professional team sport in the world, managers, the people who coach, aren't the ones making or driving the recruitment. You take into account what they said.
Yeah.
But there is somebody else there who has an expertise in recruitment, who has an expertise in negotiations, and who has the club's medium to long-term future at heart more than a manager, because managers are going to be judged on short-term results. And I think this is one of the things that really hurt United over the years, that they were like, oh, look, how do we support Van Gaal? Well, let's say yes to everything Van Gaal wants. Let's say yes to everything Mourinho wants. Let's say yes to everything Moyes wants. That's not good for the club. It's probably not good for them either. And I think Ten Hag is the ultimate example here, right? Because they end up, Ten Hag's knowledge of players will necessarily be limited because he's always worked with a director of football before. And so you end up signing all these guys from the Dutch league who he already knows, overpaying for them in many cases. And if I were a United fan, I would want to see a really empowered head of recruitment sporting director.
I think you need to find a middle ground though, because as we've seen, some sporting director of football also not always sign good players, great players that fit the profile that you want or play the football that you want either. So I think that's the middle ground. But so far, there was never that conversation anywhere because, like you said, Ten Hag, his son, his agent, Kees Vos, were doing what they wanted at the club.
All right, Jules, let's stick with this a little more because, as I said, I am passionate about this. And I just kind of want to say something. What do we want a good head of recruitment to do. And obviously, you want him to understand football. You want him to understand the manager's needs.
Yeah.
But in my experience, having spoken to hundreds of managers as part of my job over the years, they often fall into a trap where they think, I want this guy because only he can do the job. They don't have the idea that there is somebody else who can do the same job for cheaper or in a better condition or whatever. And the reality is, unless you're signing prime Messi or Cristiano or Mbappe, there's maybe like 7 or 8 players in the world who can only do one job. And I go back to this, right? Whether it's Terrell Malacia, whether it's Anthony, these are examples at United where he's like, oh, I need a winger who can do this and that and blah, blah, blah. I know Anthony, I trust Anthony.
Yeah, which is a good thing. Sometimes your manager, you want to work again with some people who you've worked
Can be a good
you
thing,
know
right?
Yeah.
But you end up overpaying. You don't end up considering.
I
I'll refer you to my favorite example of this because it's somebody who is honest about it. When Jurgen Klopp needed a winger at Liverpool, back in 2015, 2016, whenever it was, he's like, yeah, I want Julien Brandt. Julien Brandt, really talented. Julien Brandt, blah, blah, blah. Dortmund, I know him, blah, blah, blah. Brandt, blah, 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 right? And then the club say, nah, we got all these smart nerds over here. We have I'm blanking on the guy's name now, but, our head of recruitment.
Michael Edwards.
You want Mo Salah. Mo Salah is a much better option than Julien Brandt. Klopp's like, no, Julien Brandt, right? And then what happens?
You don't know how Brandt would have done at Liverpool.
We don't. But I'm pretty sure Julien Brandt would never have achieved the heights that Mo Salah achieved.
No, maybe not. But
maybe
he could
not.
have brought something different.
Yeah, something not as good, right?
No, but
yeah, something different, right? Like I want to eat filet mignon, and you bring me skirt steak. Yeah, it's something different. Or you bring me tofu. It's different. It's not filet mignon, right? The club had the intelligence and the preparation to say, look, Mohamed Salah under Klopp can perform far better than Julien Brandt. That is the decision that we're going to make as part of our committee, as part of our process. Klopp had the humility to accept that. And what happened? Mohamed Salah became one of the best players.
It's not always that simple.
It's not always that simple.
Like that.
But the point is, if he had said, it has to be Julien Brandt, then at the other end, you end up overpaying for Julien Brandt.
Maybe, but you don't know. Julien Brandt might have become a world-class player in the club at Liverpool as well. Nobody can say what would have happened if Brandt had signed and not Salah. Now it turned out
we can't say we've seen Julien Brandt play for the last 10 years. He's a good footballer. No. He's not Mohamed Salah.
When Mohamed Salah signed, did you think that he would have this career at Liverpool? No, you didn't. Nobody did. No. Nobody did. Even Klopp has said that he has been surprised. So nobody did. So you don't know about Brandt. I get your point, and it's a very, very good point. I'm just saying, and that's why earlier I said about middle ground and balance. It's not always, I know Sven Mislintat is not a very good sporting director, but look at the mess that he's done at Ajax in the space of one summer where he was only his signing and nothing about what the manager wanted, etc., etc. So sometimes it works. Sometimes
you need to take it into account. You need to have the good chemistry there.
Yeah, there's more and more managers who watch a lot of other games than their teams, who watch loads of players who are really interested in that side of the game, and some managers who don't care. It's just that they want to sign that guy because they share the same agent, for example. How many times have we seen that?
Oh, I think specifically in the case of Manchester United, where if you have a guy like Erik ten Hag, who did very well at Ajax, working with scouting and recruitment, and I'm not saying he wasn't involved in transfers, but it's not like, he was sitting at home, staying up all night, watching tapes of Brian Brobby, right? The reality is other people said, okay, what do you need? You need a guy with these characteristics? These are the guys we found, blah, blah, blah. What do you think? Watches a couple of videos, says, okay, this is my, top 3 choices, and then delegates to the club.
Yeah, it happens like that more often than not. It happens more like that where a manager says to his sporting director and his recruitment team, I need a right back. I want these qualities, good crosser of the ball, very good defensively, never beaten one-on-one. I don't know, whatever profile you want and need for a right back. And then his team of recruitment comes back and says, this is the top 5 that we have within our budget. So here is the number 1, here's the number 2, here's the number 3. Then this manager goes and watches a lot of tapes and a lot of data and stats over those 5 players and say, of those 5s, I would rather him being the number 1 and go for him first. This is how it happens most of the time. But then you're right, there's a lot of cases.
Except for the part about managers going and watching a lot of tapes and a lot of
but
data.
There's also a lot of cases where you're right, the manager says, no, we're going to do it my way. I want these players. I don't want to hear about anybody else who plays in that position. It's him. or nothing, or I'm not happy. And
that's what happened at Manchester United, and that was a
often.
big part, I think, of the problem and why they find themselves in this situation. Paul Mitchell, I believe, I don't know where he was before Southampton, or if he was anywhere before Southampton, but he basically started out as a scout, right?
Yeah.
At Southampton, made that transition, moved to Spurs.
Yeah.
And then from Spurs, he worked for the Red Bull organization.
Exactly, yeah. Leipzig,
and then
etc.
from there, he moved to Monaco.
Yeah.
Where under him, he had Lawrence Stewart, who's now at Chelsea.
That's right.
And then he left Monaco a year ago, something like that? Or towards the end of last season.
Yeah, in the summer, at the end of last season.
But he announced he was leaving.
Yeah, before, yeah.
So, what are his qualities from what you saw at Monaco?
He clearly has a very good eye for talent, for young talent especially. Also because I think in some cases it's the hardest way. If you're Manchester United and you sign big stars, big players, a lot of us can identify, top players in the top positions. I think he's
Erling Haaland is a pretty good centre forward.
Yeah, exactly. Or Kylian Mbappe could be good for your team. That kind of stuff. So I think he's a very smart guy. He works really, really hard. He spends a lot of time watching players, analysing data, working with his team around him to make good signings, not overpriced signings, things like that. He's made mistakes before. There've been signings that happened in all those clubs that didn't work out for whatever reason. But I think considering or compared to what United have had before, not have before as a sporting director or director of football, whatever one you want to call it, I think he's a huge, huge improvement.
So looking at this, if I'm trying to think of the negatives, and I think there's very few negatives with Paul Mitchell in terms of his rep and whatever, but the potential, the potential questions I would be asking if I were Manchester United before I hire Paul Mitchell. One is, when the biggest club he's been at before was Spurs, right?
Yeah.
That didn't work out.
No.
My understanding is it didn't work out in part because of the relationship with the manager.
Yeah, and the structure.
And that was a manager who he worked with before at Southampton.
Yeah.
And this is now the manager of Chelsea, Mauricio Pochettino.
Yeah.
So I'd want to definitely know more about that. About what happened. Was it Daniel Levy poking in, saying no to everything and being the Grinch?
Or was it Pochettino who wanted to be the sporting director as well as the manager?
Yeah, I think I can answer that. Yes. My understanding, based on conversations also with somebody else who was there, who was the sporting director before, that is kind of the Pochettino MO once he establishes credibility. Look, and let's not forget, at the time, Pochettino had achieved tremendous things with Spurs. So he had all the credit. He was being linked to Real Madrid, Manchester United, whatever, right? My other concern might be, you mentioned young players, identifying talent, and so on. If you're Manchester United, yes, obviously that's very important, but it's not like you're going to go on a 5-year rebuilding job through youth, right? You're going to have to also go and acquire ready-made players at the peak of their career, right?
Yeah,
like the Casemiro signing, or Varane. You need to have that blend.
Yeah.
That's not something he's really done before.
No, because at Leipzig, even at Spurs, you don't attract the same, as you mentioned, Gab, rightly so, you don't attract the same players at Manchester United. You don't have the same budget either. Leipzig can't spend 80 million on 3-4 players in your current squad like United can. So I think with that and with the ambition of the club, at Leipzig, he knew exactly what he was asked for. At Monaco, very
scenario.
similar too.
Real Madrid signs Mbappe. Yeah, you like this, yeah? So Vinicius says, all right, screw this. I know I signed a contract. I want to leave. I don't like Xabi Alonso. Whoever takes over, he smells, whatever, right?
Yeah.
And then you have a decision. So Real Madrid put Vinicius on the market. This is all hypothetical, by the way. Please don't clip this.
Don't go mad at Gab.
You have to then put a value
Yeah.
on how much you're willing to spend with Vinicius. You're going to have to, how much you want to pay Vinicius and so on. This is a skill set which Paul Mitchell hasn't had to deal with yet, right? So this is the unknown.
On another scale.
But never on a scale for such a...
Yeah, but it's the same for a £10 million player. If the other club won 20, you value him at 10. It's the same as 200 and 100 million.
The difference is that if it's a £10 million player, you don't have, and it's Leipzig or Monaco, let's face it, Monaco have about 10 fans. Leipzig, nobody likes them. So you're in a situation.
You still don't want to get your transfers wrong.
No, that's fine. But anything like this that plays out, say this hypothetical Vinicius, Real Madrid, Manchester United, you have the two biggest brands in the world. You have Brazil, the biggest brand in international football.
Yeah.
You have Vinicius.
Yeah.
Everything gets played out in the glare of the spotlight. It is a big step up.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, and look, I'm not being negative about it, but again, if I were interviewing Paul Mitchell, I would say, how would you deal with this? How do you see this, right? I think these are the unknowns, which is fine. You always have that. And if you don't give him a chance, you'll never find out. So I'm certainly not being critical of it.
No.
But that would be the big step up, right?
Yeah, it would. But I think that he's got a huge network and he knows a lot of people in the game. He's usually, I think, quite wise in what he does. And again, I agree with you where he's never signed a £100 million player yet. In his whole career, I'd be very surprised. But on the back of my head, I don't
Most
think
expensive with Golovin?
Maybe, yeah.
That worked out great, didn't it?
But I think Golovin was even there before Paul Mitchell arrived. So we need to look it up. But it would not be 100 million anyway. However, I also think that he's got the personality and the kind of man management is wrong for sports director, but he's quite a charmer. He talks really well. He could convince you of a good project. Not that he probably needs to convince Vinicius if Vinicius wants to come to United, but I think he could put that all together very, very nicely.
Okay, so we talk about him as a head of recruitment, and I don't want to get stuck on titles, but they do become relevant. We're talking about as a sporting director, we mean the guy who does contracts, who buys and sells players, who's kind of the go-between between the club and the first team coach, right? United, for the first time in their history, appointed somebody to that role, I think, 18 months ago. And that man is John Murta.
Who didn't really have the pedigree to get that title, right? We agree
I think he didn't have the pedigree, he didn't have the track record. I think also he probably suffered from the fact that this was an internal promotion and they create a new position. So it's not like Murta could go into the job and be like, oh, the guy before me had authority over this, that, and that. He was in a situation where he was defining the role. I think when you get promoted internally in any organization,
isn't that better even because you can shape it the way you want because you're the first one.
But you go from working for the manager to then being the manager's boss. I think that's effectively the thing. And unless you have somebody powerful behind you, like the CEO, but then the CEO was Ed Woodward, who was on his way out at the time. I think it's difficult, even if you want to, even if he has the skill set, to go to Van Gaal and say, no, Van Gaal, this is Wout Weghorst, this is stupid. Or Anthony, no, not a penny more than 50 million. Or whatever, whatever he's going to do, right? He doesn't necessarily have the internal authority, especially the club, where the kind of institutional memory of the club culture is, no, the gaffer's in charge because that's the way it was under Sir Alex, right? So I think all these things made his job harder.
Yeah.
I don't think it's I think his title is football director. And all these briefings that they brief with Paul Mitchell coming as sporting director, we agree these are just titles. You can call him director of football, general manager. We assume Paul Mitchell, if he comes in, it's either going to be Paul Mitchell or Paul Mitchell. Whoever they bring in is going to be the boss there. And Murta will either work under him or seek employment elsewhere.
I think John Murta will either do something else or leave the club. And rightly so. He should not be staying, certainly not with that title. There's no, he didn't do a good job as director of football or whatever the title he had. Let's be honest here.
Football director.
I'm sure, football director. I'm sure he's a nice guy. We know a lot of people who know him well, who work with him.
Speak highly of him.
Speak. So I'm sure.
But it's down to what you're empowered to do.
Yeah, maybe. But he still hasn't done a good job. I'm really sorry.
The other names that are being mentioned in connection with the club, and I'm sure there'll be some sort of commercial director, but we're not going to bore you because unless you're a sponsorship nerd, you're not going to care.
Yeah.
Are two guys that obviously have strong links with Ratcliffe. One is Dave Brailsford.
Yeah.
This is a cycling thing, so this might be more up your alley than mine.
No, he does all the sports now because he came at Nice, which is the other club, one of the other clubs owned by Jim Ratcliffe, Sir Jim Ratcliffe. And Brailsford was heavily involved, not always in a nice way, in the last 18 months or so at Nice doing a big audit. Okay,
for those who don't follow cycling, can you tell us how Dave Brailsford became famous? What he became famous for?
He kind of revolutionized in a way, like road cycling certainly here in England by creating the Sky team that became really, really successful, popular, won Tour de France, where he was this big brain behind it, behind them being so good, focusing especially on the marginal gains. So anything that can help you, even what looks like a tiny thing.
The pillows, the hand sanitizer, whatever.
Everything, the way you sleep, the way you eat, all of that, he thought highly of. And then when he got into the Ineos family, if you want.
I think there were some questions also about what happened with Sky, which I'm going to refer you to Google on as well. No, because it is part of the story. I'm not, I'll just leave it at that. But it is cycling, so bear that in mind.
Yeah, but then he got into the Ineos family, which is this like sporting kind of empire that Sir Jim Ratcliffe has been building. So they've got Formula One, they've got sailing, they've got rugby.
The Ineos Formula One team. What are you talking about, Formula One?
They are a big partner in one of the Formula One team. What are you talking about? Which one? McLaren, I think. Right. They're everywhere.
So not the one that wins. Okay.
They're heavily involved in Formula One and in sailing and in rugby and in loads of sports, including football. They own a few football clubs. Mercedes, not McLaren, Mercedes for Formula One. So they're big. They're big in all the sports. And Dave Brailsford is involved. He's kind of one of the big heads of all of that. So he's involved in anything that he wants to be, like Nice.
Is he a potential CEO? Probably not, right?
No, but he would be
a guy who can help advise.
He would be heavily involved. Right. I think he would be like a consultant at Manchester United, because that's what he wants as well. Remember Sir Clive Woodward, after he won the Rugby World Cup with England?
Going to Southampton.
Everybody wanted his view, his expertise, even in sports I didn't know. Sir Dave is the same.
And then there's JeanClaude Blanc. We've mentioned him before.
Yeah,
he's the guy who, if you remember the Calciopoli scandal, this is the first time I first met him or knew of him, was after the Calciopoli scandal in 2006. Juventus got relegated. The owner says, "Oh my God, all these people are toxic who've been involved with the club. Let's bring in somebody from the outside who's got nothing to do with Juve." And so they brought in a CEO. Sant'Albano, who was but nothing to do with football. Maybe he was a football fan, I don't know. And they brought in JeanClaude Blanc.
Yeah. Well, Blanc was the CEO and Sant'Albano the president?
He's one or the other.
Something like that, yeah.
But then, since then, he's had some big jobs in French football.
Yeah, he went to PSG, did really well there. I think he did a good job at Juve to clean things up and certainly put the club on.
Not so much on the pitch, but that was beyond their control.
He's not a football. I mean, he loves football, but he's not a football guy himself, right? You won't see him involved heavily in transfers, in recruitment, in first team football. He's not De Laurentiis. He would not come down onto the pitch.
He's not going to tell Ten Hag that Marcus Rashford, let's play him on the right.
Exactly. That's not him. However, he's very good with numbers. He's a very smart guy. He knows all the economics, all the way, the structures, everything.
So we're thinking potential CEO.
For me, yeah, he would be a great CEO. I said before, I think I even put it on social media, that if Sir Jim brings Blanc and Mitchell at United, this would be the best move they've done in a very, very long time.
Okay, in Sir Jim himself, because I look at this, and obviously Nice are doing really well this season because they finally appointed an Italian manager. Yeah. But it's not like they were pulling up trees beforehand, right? Is that just part of the learning process where you've got Sir Jim and his money and Brailsford and Blanc, all these smart people, but, ultimately you will make mistakes and there will be growing pains?
Yeah, so I think he made it. So the first mistake I think he made was to say that in the 3 years after he took over, which was a bit more than 4 years ago now, they would compete for the title against PSG. So we would be as good as PSG, good enough to compete with them for the title, right? First mistake, don't promise things like that.
Okay, so you delivered in year 4 rather than year 3.
Yeah, they're not going to compete, I think, with PSG.
Are they competing for the title now?
You don't play the title after 12 games, right? Thank you very much. The second one, maybe that he put his brother Bob, who I think knows even less about football than Jim himself, as the CEO at Nice, which didn't really work out, and that's why he only lasted 18 months. But the results are not, it depends what you call good or not good, but they finished twice 5th, and then 8th and 9th, I think, in the 4 years that they've been in charge. So it's not dramatic. It could have been better, of course, been better, but there's still some European qualifications there. They lost a cup final that
obviously you expect much better results at Manchester United.
Yeah, but
5th, 8th, and twice 9th isn't going to.
No. But that's it goes with the club that you have in the league that you are in. So the ambitions for United are going to be bigger. They spend decent money around the 200 million euro mark. They bought Young first, which I thought was quite clever, although Mino Raiola was heavily involved in that recruitment. And then they appointed Ian Moody, remember him?
Yes.
Yes, unfortunately, as the kind of sporting director in a way.
This is Cardiff's Ian Moody.
Yeah, exactly, of Crystal Palace. And he went and got Schmeichel, Kasper Schmeichel, Aaron Ramsey, Ross Barkley, yeah, those kind of guys. So clearly two different periods in those 4 years. The second one maybe not as great as the first one.
All right, final point on Sir Jim, because there's been rumors, and we were talking about this before
Stories,
the show, about one of his brainwaves is Jadon Sancho. And whereby he said basically, hey, or the thinking is he wants Ten Hag to get Sancho off the
make peace.
Make peace. I mean, the way I see it is I look at this and say, you're a club asset. You cost a ton of money.
Yeah.
We'll be talking about possible loan moves later, but
you need to protect
the value. Sense. You have to, I mean, the only reason, now at the same time, if Ten Hag comes back and say, listen, Sancho is so toxic and so unpleasant that he makes the rest of the team worse, and I have to put the team ahead of Sancho, and that's why I can't even have him training with us. And Ten Hag tells you that, then it's Ten Hag, then fair enough.
Yeah,
right?
because so this story is in many newspapers in England, which usually shows you that it's been
the PR people
exactly
on the phone,
which is fair with us. We know how it works. Yeah. It will happen again many times. Do you have an issue though with Sir Jim arriving at the club and already telling Ten Hag what Ten Hag has to do or what he wants Ten Hag to do? So you're Ten Hag, I'm Sir Jim, I'm coming in and say, listen, I don't like this Sancho training on his own, no contact with the first team, not even in the dressing room. This is not right. Go and make peace with him. Is it right for Sir Jim to arrive and be in the building 1 minute and tell Ten Hag what he has to do?
So I don't know that he's told him that he has to do this. I think if he goes and he asks Ten Hag and says, hey, what's the deal with Sancho? Because he is a club asset. Can you explain to me your thinking in, what your thinking is? Because look, I'm sure Ten Hag would rather have a fit and productive Sancho contributing to the first team, right? I mean, he wants that.
Yeah.
If Sancho's not there, I'm assuming that Ten Hag hasn't bumped his head and gone insane. Ten Hag is doing this because he believes, rightly or wrongly, that having Sancho around is bad for United's first team. And that's what he has to look at. That's what he's got to put first. It's as simple as that. So if he can convince Jim of that, then fair enough. If Jim trusts his decision-making process there, I got no issue with it.